I'm Sarah Vogel. I'm the horticulture educator for Illinois Extension, serving DeWitt, Macon, and Piatt counties. Um, Today, we are going to discuss some summer blooming tree species, as well as a few shrubs. You know, we all get really excited about our spring blooming trees and shrubs, maybe because that's the dawn after the dark season. But then after those spring blooms fade and the heat of summer starts to offer what seems like shades of only green foliage, there are some summer blooming trees and shrubs that are really just getting started. These can help provide a boost of color or fragrance or other ornamental features in your landscape. Certainly, what the species I speak about today will not be an exhaustive list, but I'll touch on a few each of native trees and shrubs, as well as some tried and true non-natives. So with that, we will go ahead and get started. So as many of you may be seasoned gardeners, and even for those of you who may be beginners, the most important thing that you can do is put the right plant in the right site. So this is a friendly reminder to consider those site conditions for your new tree or shrub, or really any plant, before deciding what species you're going to install in the landscape. So these factors are really just some of the factors that essentially dictate which species are going to thrive, which might merely survive, or those that might even fail completely due to environmental conditions. So soil testing is recommended every 3 to 5 years to determine if you have a nutrient concentration or nutrient deficiency, or a pH issue, or need more organic matter, you know, that would require some soil amendments. Every 3 to 5 years, unless you're addressing a specific nutrient deficiency. You, of course, want to think about the drainage and water holding capacity in the type of soil that you have as well. A soil test can help you with that, and you can also turn to Extension for help determining those things. You also want to consider how many hours of light this tree is going to receive. Full sun, if something on the tag says full sun, that's 6+ hours. Okay, so if you aren't getting 6 or more hours of sun in a site, then it's only part sun. And that can really make a difference in the tree's ability to, you know, bloom and really be vigorous. Part sun would be more like 4 to 6 hours, and further on down the line there for part shade and then full shade. You would also want to avoid placing large trees under our power lines or utility lines. You want to try and avoid utility pruning if possible. You know, many utility workers are certainly trained in tree care and do make horticulturally correct cuts. However, repeated pruning can really stress a tree, as well as create kind of a misshapen Pac-Man sort of monstrosity. So something to consider. You also want to keep in mind the mature size of that tree, because pruning isn't necessarily a good substitute for good placement. Ideally, the tree or shrub is placed where the roots are not going to be restricted, where soils are not going to be compacted like a driveway. You want to allow the plant plenty of space to grow to maturity. I know when we plant young trees, they may appear dwarfed in a really big yard, but the hope is, right, when we plant the tree, it's going to increase in size. We don't want big limbs overhanging the roof of our house, or branches overtaking the sidewalk or patio or driveway. You also want to look for disease-resistant cultivars of things if possible. There are standard species of trees and shrubs, and there are also, you know, cultivars that have been bred for specific disease resistance. Many plants are bred to resist really common diseases like powdery mildew, various rusts, as well as verticillium wilt, which we'll talk a bit more about. You might also take into account what existing vegetation is in your yard or even in your neighborhood, because that might help you recognize what other species are already present and what pests or diseases they may be susceptible to. And that can really minimize your chances of your new tree developing an affliction. So considering other vegetation also might help you diversify your yard and your neighborhood. You know, if there's already hundreds of maple trees in the neighborhood, you might consider a different species. And then finally, there are some plants that are regulated by law, by the Illinois Exotic Weed Act. Though I believe there may be a new draft currently in the works, this law hasn't been updated with new species of concern since 2015. And so this means that there are some known invasive species out there that are still on the market. Things like Callery pear, also called Bradford pear, that gets picked on a lot. Japanese barberry is listed as a species of concern. Norway maple, those lovely purple leaf maples, as well as burning bush, which I have a photo here of. We know everybody likes to see those in the fall. And, you know, when people see these in their yards, they think, oh, well, I've never seen it spread or be aggressive in my yard, when in fact, it's the berries that birds and other wildlife might be eating and depositing those elsewhere. So look to extension or some kind of accurate science-based, research-based information on invasive species before you choose exactly what you might be planting. So we really want to keep our plants healthy, whether you're planting a new tree or you're maintaining mature trees. Keeping them healthy is the best preventative care. When planting a new tree, you want to follow proper procedures for planting, using a big wide hole, not too deep a hole, because if we plant too deeply, that can cause a lot of issues throughout the life of the tree and impact its health significantly. Want to use proper pruning methods and proper timing for pruning. This is going to help, you know, whether you're looking to preserve the flowers or reduce the height or increase fruit production. You know, there are certain methods that are recommended, and this can also keep it healthy, you know, making correct pruning cuts. Watering the first few years is recommended to really make sure that your tree or shrub gets established. The kind of best practice or recommended rule is an inch of water per week per inch of caliper. So caliper is how many inches in diameter your tree is. So you want an inch of rain per week per inch of caliper, if that makes sense. And hopefully an inch of rain per week is going to be enough for our shrubs, since you don't measure them in caliper necessarily. And you'll know if they start declining. It's also good to keep weeds down to mitigate competition for moisture and nutrient resources. Also, you know, if weeds remain in the garden or around our trees, they can cause as a source of pests and pathogens. So getting the weeds out of there is a great idea. You know, I put a question mark here by fertilization. You got to ask, does the tree even need to be fertilized? Here in Illinois, our soils are incredibly fertile, that especially our native species really don't require a lot of extra fertilization. Again, recommending that soil test before I'm putting any amendments in the soil. Then you want to, if you think, well, no, maybe my tree doesn't necessarily need fertilization, realize that if you're using fertilizer treatments on the lawn, those tree roots are receiving it too. So really looking at kind of the holistic approach there in a landscape. Too much fertilizer can be harmful, especially during drought conditions. And excess fertilizer can end up in waterways, which will affect water quality. So we really want to be careful not to overdo it. And then mulching. I'm a big proponent of mulching. You know, it suppresses weed growth. It helps to retain moisture. It adds organic matter back to the soil. A lot of really good pluses there. But you don't want to overdo that either. Here we've got what we lovingly refer to as a mulch volcano. This is essentially a tree being planted too deeply. Ideally, when you plant a tree and even mulch it, you want to be able to see the root flare of that tree, which we of course cannot see here. And what's happening behind that mulch where it rests up against the trunk is it's creating a dark, damp environment that's going to promote, you know, maybe fungal or bacterial growth, invite wildlife in there and other things that we don't want. I will also put this in the chat, maybe at the end. There is a tree owner's manual put out by the USDA Forest Service. And if you do a quick internet search for that, tree owner's manual, USDA, you'll probably come up with it. Probably one of the best resources that we have available. So we're going to discuss some of our native trees first. You might already be familiar with some, but hopefully this presentation will offer a bit of a renewed appreciation for them. I have tried to list the heights and average longevity for some species, but you know, species that have those listed, but you have to realize that trees in urban environments, and by urban, I don't necessarily mean like the downtown streets of Chicago, any landscaped environment, you know, where that tree has been introduced. So trees in urban environments live much, much shorter lives than those same species in natural settings. In fact, some experts estimate that urban trees live only a third of their genetic lifespan. So that's something to keep in mind. That's really generally due to the nature of our yards and our landscape settings. We have, you know, we end up with compacted soils, lawn or turf grass competes for moisture and nutrients, competes with the trees. We have restricted roots, you know, in different settings. Those, well, boulevards are one. But in parking lots, you'll see medians. I've heard those referred to as tree coffins, and I would wholeheartedly agree. Sometimes we get root damage or trunk damage from mowers or vehicles, just all kinds of things that might impact the health of those trees. So longevity may, in fact, vary depending on what you got going on in the yard. So first, we have Catalpa, Catalpa speciosa. This grows in zones 4 to 8. If you aren't sure what zone you're in, you might just consult your extension office, or you can do a quick internet search of USDA hardiness zones and see on the map what zone you fall into. So this is a fairly large, fairly wide range, I guess, of hardiness zones. Catalpa has a pretty large range across the entire southeastern United States. It has been listed as invasive in some parts of the US, but not here in Illinois. I tried to do a little more research on that, was having trouble coming up with exactly where. It does like moist, well-drained soil, but it can adapt to dry and or wet soils. It has a really wide pH range that it can survive in, 5.5 to 7, but it's been listed as tolerant of pH of 5 to 8. So that's, again, a wide range for really adaptable tree. Can do full sun to part shade. An interesting little fact about this species is the whorled leaf arrangement. Most deciduous trees in Illinois have either an opposite or alternate leaf arrangement, and this is one of our whorled species. So something to take a look at next time you see one in person. These trees can grow 40 to 70 feet in height, but are somewhat short-lived compared to other trees. In that time, they can still get very, very large. And, you know, I don't always let the shorter lifespan, you know, scare me away from lots of things. I mean, willow trees are pretty short-lived too, and you see weeping willows a lot in people's yards. So just something to consider. There are a lot of pros and a lot of cons to catalpas. First, we have this beautiful large inflorescence, which is actually very good for honey production. So it's going to support some of our pollinators. There's a very unique seed pod called a silique that we'll have a look at here in a moment. The leaves of catalpa are a naturally lighter chartreuse green, which may look unhealthy. You know, it may look like it's getting a little chlorotic or yellowed, but this is actually normal for this species. And to me, the large, bright green color of these leaves makes it pretty easily recognizable. Again, it's durable, it's adaptable, it tolerates compacted soils, which is a pretty big pro for urban landscapes. It does grow fast when young, which is a pretty desirable characteristic for many gardeners. This is native to southern Illinois, but it does well again in a range of zones. And Catalpa speciosa is actually northern Catalpa. There is also a southern Catalpa that's not as cold hardy and doesn't get quite as large as northern Catalpa. On the con side, the flowers don't last an incredibly long time. They are beautiful, but they don't last a really long time. Some consider it messy. The wood can get brittle, so it may have a better tendency to break in storms. While there are other pests and disease that the species can develop, verticillium wilt is the major disease of the ornamental catalpa. Verticillium wilt is a very common soil-borne fungal disease that affects a lot of species. In fact, we're going to look at those in just a moment. Catalpa just happens to be really, really susceptible to verticillium wilt. And while other species might only suffer minor effects or a very slow death from verticillium wilt, it's pretty quickly fatal in Catalpa. In fact, this is what it can look like. The verticillium wilt is a fungal disease that will kind of block the vascular system. Verticillium fungi, there's kind of two active fungi in that. They're commonly found in lots of Illinois soils. They're found in roots, branches, and leaves of infected plants. These fungi enter trees and shrubs through their roots. And essentially, like I said, block the water conducting tissue, the xylem of plants. And so, that blockage is going to stop water movement. This is eventually what leads to wilting. So Catalpa will sometimes exhibit these symptoms just on one side of the tree, as this image shows. If you're trying to nail down, diagnosis of verticillium wilt, often you will see vascular streaking found under the bark and the sapwood of wilted branches. So say if you cut a branch and kind of sliced it diagonally, you would see some dark colored streaking, sometimes green or blue looking, sometimes brownish looking. The University of Illinois Plant Clinic on Champaign-Urbana campus can also test for this, for verticillium wilt, and they have specific guidelines on how to ship tissue samples. And again, I want to touch on verticillium because it's a pretty common thing. Trees and shrubs infected with verticillium cannot be cured. They will likely eventually die, but you can extend the life of your plants by making sure that you water and fertilize properly. Established trees and shrubs, again, that 1 inch of water per week. If you get less rain than that, again, maybe a drip or soaker hose for supplemental water. You, again, want to make sure any fertilization is based on a nutrient soil test, and try to remove the lawn, the turf grass within ideally the drip line of your trees or shrubs, but as far out as you can, and put a good 3 inches of mulch down. Shredded hardwood, pine mulch, cedar mulch, arborist wood chips, anything would be good. With verticillium, you want to prune out the dead branches as they occur, dispose of those branches by burning or landfilling. Don't bury or compost your branches that have verticillium wilt. You also want to be sure to clean your pruning tools between cuts by either that 10% bleach solution for 30 seconds or a 70% alcohol, isopropyl alcohol, which the alcohol may be a little less corrosive on tools. And excuse me. The best way to avoid verticillium wilt is to plant trees and shrubs that are immune or resistant to it. Pardon me. Excuse me. So not to go on too long about verticillium, but when I said there's a lot of species that it affects, this is an exhaustive list as we know it right now. So resistance or susceptibility of these species depends on that species. Maybe if it's a cultivar and or the strain of verticillium present in the soil. So you want to try and look for resistant varieties. And of course, we aren't going to memorize all these, but if you have a handout or you can do a quick internet search, when you do an internet search and you're looking for accurate science-based information, I always suggest putting in, verticillium wilt extension or .edu. That way you're led to a really good source of information. So back to the catalpa tree, back to the good news about this tree, the beautiful flowers that they have in summer. And they are very, very pretty. They're almost orchid-like, very delicate flower. We also have, the trees are generally loaded. If they're getting full sun, these flowers are good. The trees are just going to be loaded with blooms. We also have our seed pod, the Salique, as I mentioned. They might look similar to fruits of the pea family or legumes, but they are in fact a Salique, and they are dehiscent, meaning that when they dry, they will split open to release those seeds. And those Saliques can get really big, like 8 to 20 inches. Probably I've seen some a little bit larger than that even. So just a really neat feature on a tree. Next, we have tulip poplar, also called yellow poplar or tulip tree as common names. This is the point at which I like to point out the importance of scientific names for this reason. There may be a lot of common names for a plant, but there's only one scientific name. So this scientific name is the binomial, or two names, is Liriodendron tulipifera. Binomial names are also cool because they can be descriptors of the species. So the genus name Liriodendron comes from Lyrion, which is Greek for lily, and dendron means tree. So this translates to lily tree. And then the second part of the binomial, tulipifera, it describes the tulip-shaped flower. So you've got a little description in each scientific name. I'll touch on a few more of those, not to bore anybody. This tree is hardy to zone 5, so that's most of Illinois. It is very, very tolerant, very adaptable to many soil types and pH, though it does prefer acidic soil. It does like full sun. It might grow in shade, but it will not bloom as well or thrive like it would in full sun. And they're pretty long lived. They can live anywhere from 80 to 300 years, with the average about 135 is what is listed. So on the pro side, despite being a native, this tulip poplar has a more limited wildlife value than other indigenous trees like cherries or oaks or willows. However, the poplar is favored by the larvae of several butterfly species, one of which uses the tree as its sole host plant. So meaning this butterfly species lives, eats, and reproduces exclusively on tulip poplar. It's relatively fast growing. Again, we like that as gardeners sometimes. It's not always a good thing. Fast growing isn't always a good thing in some species. That can also cause for weak wood, but this does not necessarily have that issue. So it's fast growing. It produces a straight central leader, which forms this nice pyramidal shape. And then with time and maturity, it grows into a larger oval shape. It does have lumber value, but as gardeners, we probably aren't necessarily using it for that. There are not a lot of issues with tulip poplar. It can get aphids or scale, including magnolia scale, which there is now effective treatment for. Generally, the most common issue with it is powdery mildew, which is, it's cosmetic, really, disease. The tulip poplar can get leaf spot as well as verticillium wilt is possible. Leaf and shoot blight is really only a big problem in young trees under 10 feet tall. as once they are taller, the damage is pretty negligible. In drought conditions, which I've seen here in central Illinois for some time, in drought conditions or very dry sites, the leaves of this tree will turn yellow and leaf abscission will occur. It's gonna get rid of some of those leaves and drop them. And essentially the tree is like saving its own energy, saving its own moisture by letting some of those leaves go. With this tree species, it's best to avoid street adjacent plantings, like boulevard plantings, unless there's enough soil available to really be able to provide adequate moisture. Here's our lovely flower. It is very tulip-like, hence the name. Here's our pretty unique looking leaf. You don't see any others similar to this. And then the fruit is a cone-shaped aggregate of winged seeds called samaras. Like maple seeds, those are also called samaras, little helicopter whirlybirds. This fruit will open up and release those samaras. Here is an example of when they open up, when those seeds are released and the cone opens up. And as you can see in the image on the right here, this tree was absolutely loaded with blooms and evidenced by all the little fruits opening up there. To answer your question, when it drops leaves in drought, it's not sick. It's probably stressed, which, you know, would be considered kind of an environmental condition affliction. But it's not, it doesn't necessarily mean it has like a disease or anything. Now, that's not to say if your tulip tree is sick that it won't do the same thing. There could be multiple factors going on in there. Like many answers in extension, it depends. And then here's a few images of the younger to more mature tulip poplars. You can see that nice pyramidal form on the left. It's okay fall color in the middle there. It's not spectacular. It gets yellow. And then on the right, you can see in maturity, it's kept this nice straight central stem and more into that oval shape. So all in all, a really nice tree, and it is fairly commonly used in landscaping. Next, we have American linden, also called basswood or American basswood. There is another linden that we'll discuss that's native to Europe, but this one is native to the US. American linden or basswood, it does maintain a relatively pyramidal habit, so it's nice and dense form. It has a pretty unique leaf with an oblique leaf base, meaning the base of this leaf is uneven or unparalleled. Just kind of a cool little identification tidbit. The linden, American linden, is somewhat tolerant of dry soils, but not as much as other species. So it would be really, really important that the site conditions suit this tree wherever you might put one. Or could be the reason why one is not doing well, that it's not, you know, that it's dry or in drought conditions. This species can tolerate a wide range of pH from 5 to 8. It can get very tall, even over 100 feet. I have listed here 50 to 80, which may be more common in our landscape settings, but it can get over 100 feet high. And it's relatively long-lived. Some of our pros and cons here. They're pretty adaptable. These are found in both dry and upland areas. It like naturally found in both dry upland areas as well as moist low woods. When this tree is in full bloom, bees often visit it like in such abundant numbers that the humming can be heard from far away. Basswood honey is made from the nectar of those flowers and has a pretty distinct taste and is apparently highly sought after. So those of you who keep bees, maybe you want one of these trees in your yard. On the con side, it can often develop basal sprouts, or sometimes people call them suckers, which cause for a little more maintenance. Sometimes with cultivated varieties of American linden. That can be due to an incompatible root graft, where the top of the tree has been grafted onto generic rootstock, and it may be kind of incompatible, and that can send up suckers, but it also naturally does that. Not always terrible. Some of the pests include scale, mites, aphids, and borers, but it is very susceptible to Japanese beetle. In fact, those Japanese beetles will make the leaves look like lace if you haven't seen that before. So that's not necessarily going to be fatal to the tree, but it's, aesthetically unappealing, and repeated defoliation can certainly stress a tree. Most cultivated varieties of linden are resistant to verticillium wilt, so it's got that going for it. But if it does get verticillium wilt, it can be fatal. So here's a little look at the flowers. You can see we've got some pollinator species on it already. They are quite fragrant, smell very sweet. The fruits are an open cluster of hard nutlets, which when these drop, they do not, really bother anybody. They're not a pain in the neck like some other fruits. I'm looking at you, sweet gum. And again, they maintain this really nice pyramidal shape. This is a bit older image here, but you can see on this, in this monoculture along this street, we have a few linden varieties, and they all really maintain that pyramidal shape, which is nice, like a dense form to them. Next, we have the Kentucky coffee tree, one of my favorites. We have Gymnocladus dioicus. So gymnos means naked, and clados means branch. And it's called naked branch because it leaves out really late and it drops leaves really early. So it's only, really has leaves on it like half the year. However, it has an incredibly interesting shape, really interesting bark, and the seed pods make it really a beautiful tree year round. Then the second part of the binomial, dioicus, indicates that it's dioecious, or that male and female flowers occur on separate plants. Okay, so we'll have a male plant and a female plant. Mostly males are on the market for street trees, but female species are certainly available for landscapes. I think they're even cooler because of those seed pods, personally. I got a picture of the leaf here. I think it's a really neat leaf. What you see in that picture, that is one whole leaf. Okay, so it's a compound leaf. In fact, it's bipinnately compound, so it's divided twice. And it's an even bipinnate compound leaf, which means it's got, it does not have a terminal leaflet coming out the top like wood, an ash, or a hickory. It's only got 3 kind of divisions on each side. Just unusual, unique. You don't see that often. Called the Kentucky coffee tree because indigenous peoples, as well as early settlers, used the stewed seeds for a coffee-like beverage, or settlers for a coffee-like substitute. However, like many other plants, it has some toxic characteristics. The leaves and any uncooked seeds can be toxic. So if that's something that you have to consider, for people that might be in your children or something in your yard, keep that in mind. Pros and cons here, a lot of pros. The trees, again, are very adaptable. This tolerates poor soils, it tolerates drought, supports a lot of different wildlife and pollinators. Really no serious pest or disease issues. The flowers are quite large, and as well as fragrant. Again, that unique seed pod that we'll look at, the leaves, twig, and bark are very cool. In fact, the bark, or twig rather, to take a twig, a branch off of this tree, or even a little tiny stem off the end of a branch, and cut it open to see the pith or the inside of the twig, it's a salmon pink color, which I can show you a little evidence of here. And also because of these, the way the leaves are arranged, it allows for dappled shade, which will, in turn allow for better growth of turf below it, maybe not right below it, competing with those roots, but further out. On the cons, some people might consider it messy due to the seed pods, which I, again, think are very attractive, somewhat of a slow grower, but really no serious pest or disease issues listed, which is a huge plus for gardeners. So our male flowers on the male tree are going to be only about 4 inches long, while these female flowers get up to about 12 inches long. And again, fragrant. The fruits are let's see here. Here's the bark. And so you may not be able to tell from this image necessarily, but between like in the fissures of this bark, like down deep, if you were to kind of peel some off, you might notice like an orangish or salmon color underneath there. That's the same salmon pink color that is inside that twig, the pith. Again, the fruits are these flattened reddish brown pods. Well, they're green here, but they mature into brown pods. They are legumes because they're in the pea family, generally about 4 to 6 inches long, maybe a little longer. Another thing here is they may not produce these pods for like 15 years, okay? So it may take a while to get to this point, but it's a beautiful tree up until then as well. It is part of the pea family and produces these legumes, but unlike other leguminous plants, this is not a nitrogen fixer. Many members of the legume family or pea family have an association with bacteria that converts gaseous nitrogen into a usable form, but this Kentucky coffee tree is not a nitrogen fixer, cannot fix that nitrogen like that. How do you tell when it's young? The flowers, if you can get it to flower, the female flowers will be larger, or if you buy it from somewhere, they'll likely know. It may even be a cultivated variety. And now we're on to some of our non-native species. And just a little note here, I'm not a total purist. Some people are, and that's great too. But I'm okay with some non-native things in the garden as long as we're making sure it's not an invasive species. I touched on this earlier. Non-natives can sometimes over time be problematic. In fact, many once recommended species have become invasive and harmful to native ecosystems. That's the big thing about invasive. It's not that, oh, they're taking over our yards or gardens. It's that when invasive species that are not native to this area come in and they do really well, sometimes called a species generalist or site generalist, it means that they can withstand just about any conditions and they're going to like proliferate, put off a lot of seed, be aggressive growers and so on. And in that, they might outcompete some of our native species. So that's why they are harmful to our ecosystems. As I mentioned, some invasive species are regulated, some are not. I had mentioned go to your extension office for more information, or if you're going to do a internet search, maybe put some of these search terms into the search bar. And I wanted to mention this, this publication, Management of Invasive Plants and Pests of Illinois. This lists, woody species, herbaceous, grasses, forbs, and even vines. Great resource. They list the things that are species of concern right now. Again, some of those that have not yet been regulated by law. So if you're looking at non-native, just make sure it's not on this list. So one of our tried and true non-native tree species is sourwood. In fact, it is listed as native to the very, very tip of southern Illinois, but it doesn't even list what county. So I have a feeling like maybe it was seen there a couple times and not reported. The common name sourwood is derived from the fact that chewed leaves have a very tart, acidic taste. Some liken it to a sour apple. And looking again at our scientific name, our binomial, oxy means acid, dendron means tree. And so you kind of get that, puts that together. This species does grow well in moist, well-drained, acidic soil. In fact, they're in the same family as blueberries, so they're ericaceous, and those species as you may know, prefer acidic soil. With this one, with this species, the more sun it's allowed to have, the better foliage colors are going to be, even fall color. Essentially, it's a medium-sized tree with a pretty long lifespan in natural settings. Not a huge tree, I would say more of a medium size. Pros and cons. This is another great species for honey production. The fall color is beautiful, not a lot of maintenance required, very dainty, attractive flowers, and the bark is also really lovely. Pests are not usually a problem for sourwood. Fall webworm can defoliate portions of the tree in summer and fall, but usually control is not needed for that. Twig blight can kill leaves at the end of the branch tips, and in trees that have poor health anyway, they're going to be more susceptible to that. So if you do start to see twig blight, of course, prune out infected branch tips and try to fertilize lightly. Leaf spots can discolor some leaves, but are not serious other than causing premature defoliation. And really, none of these afflictions are listed as serious threats to this species. Just thought it was fair to list them. So here is some of the fall color, which again is just gorgeous, beautiful red, almost turning purple. It's so red. Here's the bloom starting to bloom out. And here's a picture of the tree's shape and form. You can see again that nice pyramidal form, a relatively dense canopy. It doesn't splay out all over the place. And kind of just neat looking. Oh, you can see that how many blooms are on this tree from this picture from far away as well. This tree is also called the lily of the valley tree. And if you see an up close of the blooms of these little flowers on the inflorescence, you can probably see why if you're familiar with lily of the valley. Next, we have little leaf linden. This is the species I mentioned is native to Europe as well as Southwest Asia, but it is used throughout the eastern US. It's even more adaptable to soil moisture and varying pHs than is American linden. Does require full sun, a taller tree, so a larger tree, but not as big as, you know, some of our oaks and things. And it has a medium lifespan, I would say. The big thing about this tree is that it is tolerant of lots of different things. It can even, you know, I have listed here the heat, wind, drought conditions, air pollution. It's been listed as tolerant to like salt spray where you're next to roads or sidewalks. So just a really sturdy, durable tree. There's lots of different cultivars available. So it is, the cultivars are, you know, bred to be disease resistant. However, Japanese beetles also will get this one. Japanese beetles have been known to especially attack the cultivar called green spire. So look out for that one. Again, maintains that lovely, dense, pyramidal shape into maturity. The male flowers will get about 4 inches long, while female flowers, oh, I'm sorry, that's the wrong one. These are little clusters of inflorescence, again, quite fragrant, just like the American linden. Here is the nice shape of this tree. And here is the little, once the blooms have faded, we still have this kind of little winged, I think it's part of the sepal, and that little hard nutlet. It's, again, not very bothersome for a tree fruit. Next, we have our Japanese pagoda tree. It is now called Stipnolobium japonica, formerly known as Sephora japonica. Taxonomists just really like to play around and change things on us, keep things exciting. This is also called the Chinese scholar tree because it's actually native to China and Korea, not Japan. Pretty adaptable in terms of soil. It does prefer acidic, but can tolerate others. full sun to part shade. So that's a pretty wide range. Medium to large size tree with a relatively long lifespan. No serious pest or disease issues. Again, that's a huge one in the pro column for gardeners. It's another species that's going to allow for that dappled shade. The actual flowers are kind of small, but the inflorescence is, or cluster of flowers, that's what the inflorescence is quite large, and it smells good to boot. There are several cultivars available. Some varieties can take a long time to flower, like 10 years. But remember that the ones that you're purchasing at garden centers and so on are typically already a few years old. So that's something to keep in mind. Some people call it messy because if the flowers all are allowed to fall in the concrete, they can stain. So here's our little tiny flower. You can see the larger inflorescence behind it. Here's the fruit or the legume. So again, part of the pea family. That's how plants are classified into families, is by their reproductive structures, in case you didn't know that. And here's a picture from a tree far away, and you can just see again, this tree is absolutely loaded with bloom. So if it gets good, healthy site conditions, environmental conditions, it will do quite well and be a performer. Next, we're going to move on to some summer blooming native shrubs. I like to focus on trees, but really shrubs are just little trees, right? So we'll start with our smooth hydrangea, Hydrangea arborescens. These are, again, a wide range that they can survive in, zones 3 to 9. They can adapt to a variety of soil conditions, but they are intolerant of drought. So the foliage tends to decline considerably in dry conditions. It is a water lover, as the prefix hydra would indicate. Plants may die to the ground in really harsh winters. It's always a question, when do I prune my hydrangeas? Well, it's different for different kinds of hydrangeas. On this one, the bloom occurs on new wood, so plants can be pruned back close to the ground in late winter to revitalize it and encourage a vigorous stem growth and its best form. If it's not pruned back, any of those weakened or damaged stems, you might want to remove those before early spring. A nice short little shrub. Again, pros, it's native to Illinois. If you do remove those flowers, the spent flowers, you can get a second flush of flowers that might appear in August and September. Not always, but it can rebloom. It can tolerate full sun farther north as long as it's got constant moisture. It supports a wide range of pollinators and will rebloom. The lace cap flowers on the standard species are really the best for pollinators. Some of the cultivated varieties, the flowers are so voluminous, I guess, that it's hard for some pollinators to get down into them. So the lace cap are really the most beneficial for pollinators. This plant looks really great when it's planted in groups. It's nice for hedges or even for screening sometimes. It's more cold hardy than many other hydrangeas. Again, will not tolerate drought. Not deer resistant. In fact, they consider it a treat, apparently, or at least in my area. Not all cultivated varieties will support pollinators, like I mentioned. There are some diseases listed, but none are really serious threats. So here's a look at the standard species with the lovely dark green foliage and these lace cap flowers just starting to open up. This is an Annabelle cultivar. Lots of different cultivars kind of created from this one. And, you know, the flowers are fantastic. You can also use the spent blooms or the dried blooms for arrangements, or even just to serve as winter interest in the garden. Next, we have Virginia sweetspire, Itea virginica. The natural habitat for these plants is on shaded stream banks. So it likes medium to wet soils. It will take full sun, but likes kind of medium in that part sun, part shade. Will do a lot of soil conditions though. Has great long lasting fall color. And I'll tell you, one of the best things about this, we'll get to the pros, is it requires little to no maintenance. It is just a fantastic shrub. It's adaptable. It works really well in rain gardens because it likes those wet, more wet environments or can withstand them. It is fragrant. The flowers last a really long time. And no serious pest or disease issues. And in fact, you can see that I didn't list any because the things that it may get are pretty negligible, not known as serious threats. So here's an up close of the blooms. Here's our little fruit that will come after the blooms. It's a whole raceme of capsules. In fact, this flower structure inflorescence is a raceme. It's called a raceme, and this is our capsules that form from the raceme. Here's the beautiful fall color. You can see this one's even a little spent. Some of the leaves have dropped, but it's just gorgeous. Can't be beat on a shrub. And also we'll get absolutely loaded with blooms as well. Great shrub altogether. Next, we have buttonbush, one of my favorites, Cephalanthus occidentalis. This is very easily grown in moist, very humusy soils, full sun to part shade. Grows really well, maybe almost best in wet soils, including flood conditions and even shallow standing water. I mean, you'll see it right on stream banks across the state. It does adapt to a wide range of soils, except dry ones. It cannot tolerate salt spray or salty soil, though, so maybe not next to the road or driveway if you use salt there. Pruning is not necessarily pruning is usually not necessary, but it can be done in early spring to kind of shape the plant if desired. If they get, kind of unruly, unmanageable, they may be cut back to near the ground in early spring to revitalize them. Sometimes instead of buttonbush, this is commonly called honey balls because of the little ball shaped flowers, and it does support wildlife. Yes, you could absolutely grow buttonbush on the bank of a pond. Certainly. That's where I often see it. I'll go kayaking and on the banks of the creek. That's where I will often see it or take pictures of it. Given all the other factors, the conditions of that site are conducive. The pros column, it has that winter interest because those little balls are going to hang around. The blooms stay around up to a month. So a really, really long lasting bloom on this one. You might want to prune it to keep that compact form or rejuvenate, like I mentioned. It's a great pollinator plant, great for wet sites. Very few, if any, pests or diseases that are serious threats. If you put it in full shade or in dry soils, it may survive, but again, it's not going to thrive. The flowering isn't going to be great. It just might be a shrub. And the fall color is just meh on it. Here's a picture of the extraordinary bloom. I just think it's so cool. Then we've got, this is the little cluster of nutlets there after the blooms fade. Then we have what you can see. It does get a little bit rangy, but unless you're like doing a perfectly symmetrical garden or need everything to stay exactly a certain shape, it's kind of a cool natural shape, kind of arching branches. Now we'll talk a little bit about a couple summer blooming non-native shrubs, of which there are plenty out there, but they're not all fantastic choices. So again, those site conditions really need to play into what you're planting in the yard or recommending as master gardeners. So first we have a seven sunflower. This is a species native to China, but it does well in various sites here in the US. Along with the late blooming white flowers, the seven sunflower also has these persistent rose-colored sepals that last into fall. The sepals are the little leaf-like structures that are going to enclose and protect the unopened flower bud. And once that flower does open, they're kind of the little leafy structures right underneath the bloom. So the sepals are even kind of neat on this one. A little bit larger as a shrub, kind of a tall shrub, short tree. Pros, again, very tolerant. We've got pretty cool bark on this one. Very showy flowers, not a lot of pest or disease issues. Because of the bark and so on, it does have year-round interest in the garden. It is moderately fast growing, moderate to fast. And it's pretty unique. It's not used a lot, or hasn't been used a lot yet, because it's only been around for a little bit, only been here in the US for about 40 years. On the con side, there aren't many disease or pest issues listed, but that may in fact be because it's recently introduced, like 1980. So there isn't a great deal of literature on pests or disease specific to the seven sunflower in the US. It can experience some environmental issues like stress from drought or drowning, or edema. Edema is a disorder of plants caused by the roots taking up more water than the leaves can transpire. But all in all, a pretty trustworthy plant so far. Here's a up close photo of the bloom. Here's a cultivated variety. Oh golly, the name escapes me now. It's something punny too. I should remember. Temple of Bloom. Temple of Bloom, that's what it is, which I just think is incredible. So lovely red, cultivated red flowers on these. Here's the kind of cool exfoliating bark. And then here's a photo of the shape and form of this tree. So you can see it's a multi-stemmed, somewhat large shrub. And then last we have smoke bush or smoke tree or something along those lines. There are a couple different, Mary, the last shrub was called Seven Sunflower, S-O-N. In fact, I think it might be hyphenated 7-sun flower tree. Our smoke bush, you probably do see this a lot. It has been used commonly for some time. Wide range of growing conditions, does not like wet soils, really needs full sun. It will, again, survive in more shady environments, but it's not going to perform, get that fall foliage color, that dark purple color. And it also, if it doesn't get full sun and it's in too moist a soil, you're going to start seeing some maybe fungal or disease issues because of the lack of it's not able to dry out. Our pros and cons here: very tolerant of poor soils. I see it in a lot of doing well in a lot of different urban environments. Great fall color on this. Of course, you got the dark purple color, or there's some cultivated varieties to be green as well. But the fall color is fantastic. Pretty unique flowers, the smoke-like flowers. Not a lot of serious pest or disease issues. Can get verticillium, is somewhat susceptible to that. That is probably the most serious. And the flowers last a really long time in the summer as well. Some people don't like this species because it can get leggy. Like you'll have this nice round shrub and then all of a sudden it has a branch that shoots to the moon. So it's kind of leggy when it's young, but as they develop and grow and they kind of fill out and find their form there. So here's our beautiful dark foliage. Again, a lot of different cultivars available. Fantastic fall color on this one as well. And then we had the up close of the flowers. Here's what the bloom looks like. They open to create this kind of smoke-like appearance. So a pretty apt name, not just a clever name. So that's the last species I have to talk about. With that, I'd like to remind you that all of the Four Seasons recordings can be viewed on YouTube. As Jennifer mentioned, the webinars are posted usually about 2 weeks after the live session has been captioned. And if you would be so kind, we'd love if you could take this brief survey and just let us know what you thought of this presentation. We are always looking to improve what we do, so we rely on your feedback to do that. You can point your camera, your phone camera at the screen on this QR code, or go to go.illinois.edu/summer blooming trees. And with that, I will open it up to any questions.